workplace communication across cultures. Does that sound like a daunting topic? On the one hand, it is, but on the other hand, it isn't, because we can all crack the code for how to have good cross-cultural communication as well as interpersonal communication. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to talk about misunderstandings that can happen in the workplace. My goal is to ensure that these three aspects of intercultural, cross-cultural, interpersonal communication are covered. How do we show up in the workplace? How do your individual preferences or perspectives regarding communication affect what you say and do? And then, how can you do and say the right thing? Hello, I'm Elizabeth Tulija. Many of you know me, some of you don't. I welcome you to my monthly webinar through the Intercultural Leader Institute, where I empower leaders around the world with cultural competence. I don't want to talk about myself too much because many of you follow me on LinkedIn and you can glean all of that information about me. However, I am a pracademic, somebody who has an academic background with all the theory, and what I do is operationalize it to make it practical, hence a pracademic. I've taught in universities, I've consulted worldwide, I've written books, and if I am honest, I have to say I'm only beginning to figure life out. What? Wait a minute. You're an expert on intercultural communication and global leadership? Yes. But I am a human being. And as a human being, I constantly make mistakes. And what we're talking about today is the foundation of everything I do, whether I'm teaching in an institution, consulting with clients in the USA where I'm based, or around the world. Anybody who wants more information, I welcome you to go to my website, take a look at it. I have courses available, a new one coming in later this spring. I am here to help crack the culture code, because wherever we are in the world, we have a culture. We have specific beliefs, values, and attitudes, and these affect how we show up in our daily lives. Let me tell you a story about eggs and culture. Several years ago, this was before COVID, I went from China. I flew from China in the middle of the night. That's when the flights are to go to Europe, to Malaga, Spain, where one of my colleagues from Slovenia was giving this mastermind sales course. And she works for women. I can include her information later. I love to share people's information and make those connections around the world. There was a woman from Russia, a woman from Finland, and a woman from the Netherlands, and myself, a woman from the USA. One morning, we were cooking eggs, and I made sure that my egg was well done. My Finnish colleague looked at me and said, "Oh, how can you eat something like that?" She likes her eggs cooked like they are on the right. The Russian colleague kind of gave a grunt and muttered under her breath. And then my Dutch colleague gave some kind of response like that. Could we all put ourselves on mute, por favor? Thank you. Anyway, this was an interesting insight into intercultural communication. This may seem like a superficial event, but I want to use this metaphor about eggs and culture today to help us understand how our culture, our background, the insights, the experiences that we have gained throughout our lifetime can affect how we show up in the workplace every day. And I want to use this simple example because we can get into talking about more of the difficult situations that arise. And that's what I do in my coaching and my consulting. So I am going to leave the tough conversations for today for another time. And I want to use this metaphor. And I'm talking about culture, that it's not about the Finnish do this, the Russians do that, Bulgarians do such and such. Rather, it's how things should be. We all look at the world through those cultural lenses or through how we prefer to prepare our eggs. Point number one, how does your cultural background affect how you show up in the workplace? Think about it. There are over 8 billion people in the world. It would take 8 billion steps to circle the world, walking around the world 139 times. Whew. I'm a big walker. I usually walk around 5 to 7K, 4 to 5 miles a day. That's a lot of walking. If you're 8 billion seconds year old, 8 billion seconds, you're 254 years. If you were to stack 8 billion little tiny pennies, those are the smallest coins we have in the US, you would make a tower around 7,000 miles or 11,000 kilometers high. And if you put those pennies on its side, it would cross the continental US 3 times. Do you like bananas? It would take you 200 lifetimes to eat 8 billion bananas. I think you get the picture, no pun intended. We all know this, but when we are interacting with people, and especially if it's a difficult conversation or it's some issue going on in the workplace, or you are trying to work across cultures. I recently worked with a tech organization, and they have subsidiaries in several different places around the world. There were challenges between the home country office and those in the subsidiaries. Could we all please mute our mics? Thank you. We know the metaphor of the iceberg, the cultural iceberg. We love to eat different foods, to travel to different places, to learn about customs. I was talking about that with a few of you beforehand, with Tanya from Portugal. And someday I want to go there. That's a place I haven't gone yet. However, we forget that our beliefs, the things that we govern our lives with, such as my parents, without saying a word, taught all of us kids to be kind, compassionate, and generous. Or our belief system. It could be our faith, whether a religion or a philosophy. And our attitudes, what we think about things. And you all know that if you watch any of the world news going on in the US, We are at each other's throats, is a way that a slang that we like to say. In terms of talking about politics, it's nasty. So it's the beliefs, the attitudes, and the values that we pick up all throughout our lives that affect us. This leads into point number 2. How do our life experiences affect us? It can help, it can hinder. Think about it this way. We start out as kids and we go through various educational systems. I have lived in China and I have worked and I continue to work with Chinese students coming to the US. Very different educational standards. We learn about life within that system. We learn from the friends we make. We learn through our families, our places of worship. We learn through our communities and much more. That's how we're socialized. Professor Geert Hofstede, the famous Dutch professor who had worked for IBM in the 60s and 70s, came up with a way, along with Salome Schwartz and others before him, to compare cultures, to look at the values, the societal values of people, and they broke it down via nations. And we know that nations change, borders change, countries change. But there are these general ways, these systems that we can look at the values of people and be able to say, oh my goodness, generally, people from this area of the world tend to act like this or believe that. I was just on a very early morning webinar call with colleagues from around the world, and we were talking about Angola and Côte d'Ivoire. I didn't say that right, but we were talking about the cultural dimensions of these two African countries and discussing that you can't say Africa as a whole because there are so many cultures and languages and subcultures within every country. So we grow up and we enter the workplace and the learning continues. All of these experiences shape what we think, how we behave. So the way that I look at the world, in today's global village, we don't all just get along. And I think it's a very quaint notion that talks about a global village. It makes it seem like, oh, we are so small and we all get along. But just because of technology, innovations, travel, tariffs, transportation, doesn't mean that we understand each other. We have to work even harder. I think this phenomenon of the world shrinking, it's also expanding at the same time because we have more opportunities to connect. And we know how hard it can be to cultivate those relationships within our own families. And this is the human condition. What I don't like about this metaphor of the global village is that just because we may have these closer connections due to technology, travel, tariffs, etc., it doesn't mean that we share the same experiences. And this can lead to multiple landmines. And the communication issues that have brought you to this webinar today are a lot more complex than eggs. But that's my example today. Being close together rather than bringing people to unite them, it can pull us apart. Why? Because we're all different. 8 billion people. Even if you have a twin sibling, you are different. We need to understand How can we safely interact with each other? This brings me to point number 3, and I think this is why you're attending today and people are going to watch the video afterwards. Yes, I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Thank you. Yes, I will provide you with a PDF of my key points. And the recording of this will be up on my YouTube website, so you'll all get that link. Here's my answer to the problem, and it's twofold. Today, we're going to talk about the first part. March 27th will be my next webinar, and that will be a follow-up on this. I want to talk about how can you proceed with confidence to say and do the right thing. It's all about emotional intelligent people, developing that emotional intelligence. But wait a minute, this was supposed to be about communicating across cultural differences. This is. To be able to develop cultural intelligence, which is what we'll talk about next time, you need to develop emotional intelligence. And I want to jump into that a little bit today and talk about how emotional intelligence is the antecedent to cultural intelligence. And many of you might be thinking, oh my goodness, I already know about this. We've learned about this over and over again. However, when we are, another metaphor, in the heat of the moment and things aren't going well, we forget to monitor our emotions. We even forget to be aware of our emotions, because what are we doing? We're honestly thinking about what we're going to say back. One of the projects that I am working on is creating a kind of, how would I say this, decision tree, mapping out how can we have these difficult conversations and create a plan and think through ways to respond to people before these issues come up. And I'm working with a couple of institutions right now on this, and it's something also that I cover in my inclusive leadership course. And this is a shameless plug, but you can go to my website and take a look at my inclusive leadership course. Understanding EQ can help us to understand how to have a conversation around eggs, how we cook our eggs, or even how we can discuss difficult issues such as race and racism, age issues, ethics across cultures, gender identity, religion, politics. And I'm going to explain to you how my thought process unfolded while my European colleagues were talking about my disgusting eggs. If you get in touch with your feelings and you're aware of your trigger points, what's going to annoy you, what's going to challenge you, then you can handle anything. How do you like your eggs? Some of us get annoyed at certain things. Some of us are more calm about other things. And this story about eggs is just an object lesson to deal with the more serious issues, as I've mentioned before. Someone could boldly criticize a politician you voted for. And in the US, we are so divided right now with people who have liberal ideologies and people have conservative ideologies. that there is this ad hominem, this personal attack. If you're from this side, you're a bad person. If you're from that side, you're a bad person. People can't talk to each other these days and have civil conversation. People want to argue their positions. People could say something, for example, Ramadan, the Islamic tradition, the observance of that month of fasting in worship and then celebration of specific religious beliefs. Somebody in your workplace could say, "Oh, that's just an excuse for people to slack off or be lazy or not pay attention to what they're doing." And that can be really offensive when that is your deeply held belief system with all of the values that go into it. Unfortunately, when difficult conversations like that happen, we have a variety of different responses. Maybe we just ignore it and we're angry, or we ignore it and think, oh, okay, they didn't mean anything by it, but I don't want to talk about it. Or we can say something. Sometimes we can respond with equanimity, with calmness and care, and say, hey, do you realize that here's what this religious observance is about, and here's why we do what we do. It's not about slacking off or being lazy. We come to work, we show up, yet we're fasting, and that really affects how we do our work each day for the month. Or you might get defensive and reply or retort in a way that later you think, oh, I shouldn't have. We need to have these conversations about eggs. How do you like your eggs? How do you not like your eggs? And it's very hard. I always like to have real strategies and takeaways. Now we're at that point in today's discussion. And before we get into questions, comments, and responses, I would like to give you a few tips for how you can talk about eggs or other important situations at work, whether they are domestic or international. Emotional intelligence, we know this on an intellectual level, but all of us, and myself included, and you know I share a lot of my own examples of failure, but when we can begin or continue to recognize, to have that self-awareness of what are my emotions, my moods, my attitudes, when we recognize what's triggering us, even if it's something as simple as eggs, then we can understand how it affects us and our self-management in the other box under regulation, how we can respond. There were a lot of issues going on at this wonderful retreat we had. Different personalities, strong personalities, more laid-back personalities, people arriving early and stating, I will take this room, you have that room. We were all in an Airbnb. People who wanted to get up early, people who didn't want to have our training sessions in the afternoon because it was siesta time. There were all sorts of issues going on below the surface, that iceberg. And I was, I have to say, a little annoyed at some of the things going on. But I knew that I needed to be gracious. And if I got upset and replied, ugh, not all Americans like their eggs like this, then that doesn't help the situation. There are times, though, where you need to talk about things. And you have to decide, am I going to talk about this issue that this person who maybe signed up last but arrived first took the biggest room? Is that going to be an issue? Or is it something that doesn't matter? It's really up to you. And I am not giving you any cookie cutter, using another metaphor, answer. But it's all about us deciding in the moment, how am I going to control my mood and redirect any impulse that I have in the scheme of things? Does it really matter? Short term, one could get upset and say, well, let's talk about some house rules here for the next 3 days. Or thinking long term, how do I want to manage these relationships with amazing colleagues who are now becoming my friends and with whom I will work over the years? We know human interactions are a challenge, but we constantly need to be reminded. This is what EQ is. This is the antecedent to CQ. How you respond emotionally is a choice. How I respond emotionally is a choice. And when you sign up for some of my online courses where you get individual and group coaching as we go through a really cool self-assessment, a scientifically validated self-assessment to help you understand, how do I communicate with others? How do I respond? I tell a lot of my stories about the mistakes I've made when I lived in Mexico, when I lived in Peru, and of course, most recently, Hong Kong and mainland China. And I share some of those funny yet disruptive situations where I didn't do a good job of handling my emotions and responding. Viktor Frankl he is a famous author. He wrote about his experience surviving the Holocaust in a concentration camp during World War II. And I find him an amazing example to help me remember in how I choose my responses. And I think when I think about him, it's about those difficult responses, not just the eggs. That's something a little more lighthearted, but in the really difficult times when we have to figure out, how am I going to respond? And I will never forget reading, and here on this special edition, it has a picture of a bird and a sunset. I will never forget reading about that and how every day as he fought to maintain his composure and his humanity under the worst conditions, he was grateful for that sunset. He was grateful for hearing a bird sing, even though life was so miserable. We all can choose our responses. So there's another book out that I thought is interesting. This is a recent one, Buster Benson. He worked for Amazon, and he decided, I want to have more productive disagreements at work. And I like what he talks about. You can look him up on the web. He has 200 aspects of cognitive bias. And that's where in our minds, we forget that based upon all that is below the waterline of the iceberg, we forget how we create biases. That's how cognitive psychologists tell us. That's how we're able to differentiate things. We recognize things based upon our biases, our prior knowledge. And what I like about Buster Benson's book is he says that each of us has a different level of anxiety. And we can think of it like this. A 10 would be there's huge anxiety. But it may be a 2. It's kind of like the eggs. Oh, it's annoying, but I'm going to let it go. But the anxiety that gets triggered when there is a difference, whether it's a difference of opinion or somebody said something that upsets us, or we're in a really tough situation where we're being discriminated against. That anxiety causes us to react. But if we can think about the emotional intelligence, then we're going to be able to be aware and manage ourselves. Then we're able to depersonalize or decenter what's happening. Rather than respond in an angry manner, we're curious about the other person. Tell me more about yourself. Tell me why you believe that, or why you would support that candidate, or why you don't believe in such and such a position, or whatever. And when you assume positive intent and you ask questions to understand, rather than arguing your point of view, this opens up a whole world. And this is what we do in my coaching, in my courses, so that we don't have battles about how you want your eggs cooked. In the next webinar on March 27th, and you'll see a lot posted about that in LinkedIn, we're going to talk about the next aspect, the cultural intelligence, and how we move from that self-awareness and self-management into the social awareness and relationship management across cultures. And we will specifically talk about some cultural dimensions and issues that come up. I have a guest speaker who's going to work with me in just a moment to give a little teaser of talking about issues across culture. And we've talked about this egg metaphor, and he's got a story of his own. Let me share a couple more things. And at this time, some of you have typed some questions, and these are great. I'm taking a quick look at these. Thank you, Elizabeth Derby, for putting up the Schwartz cultural model. That is excellent. This is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Some people are joking around how they like their eggs. We're going to respond to some of these questions, and then Frank is going to help me as well. So please, if you want, put some more questions in for me. But I have to do a little bit of an advertisement here. I'm doing a couple things right now. I'm going to pop into the chat how you can get information from me. You can go to my website. You can email me to ask for these, the PDF that I provide afterwards, and you can get more information about what I do with my coaching and my consulting. Thank you, Elizabeth. Changing minds. I like that. This is great. I love the connections and the collaborations. As I wrap up, we can figure out how we show up in the workplace. And I love this question that Denise asks. How can we best lead with EQ and have these conversations? We will talk about that in just a second. We can develop our EQ. We can become curious. Each of us has to figure out how we do it within our own personality and our life's experiences. But hopefully, some of these examples will help you to reflect and come up with your own strategies of asking the questions, assuming positive intent. But you need a guide. And I have to say this because as a coach, I need a guide. And I work with 2 different coaches myself to help me see those blind spots and figure out how to become a better person. We all need a guide. It's hard to do it on our own. We need somebody who can keep asking those questions and drill down, drill down, drill down to get to the base assumptions, the root of what we're struggling with. Here's how I do it. when I work with clients, I have different assessment tools that help you learn about yourself. You take it, I debrief you. We look for areas to improve. I work with organizations. They do this as a group, and we talk about how can we improve the group dynamics? How can we improve the diversity and inclusion issues in our organization by first working with it within a team and then trying to be that leaven in the bread to help the bread rise and become something that we can eat. And then we go on this journey. Please think about how you can work with me, whether as an individual or within a group. Here's the information. You will get it also in your PDF that I will send you. If you put your email here in the chat, you can direct message me or put it in the chat. You can also email me at etulija@theinterculturalleader.com. All right. This is the end of my talk. I don't just like to talk. I would like to open it up to some Q&A for maybe 5 minutes. And then I'm going to introduce my wonderful colleague, Frank Wachowski. And he will give his ideas, a little spin on this. Who would like to have, lots of text coming through. Excellent. Who would like to come off mute and ask your question or make your comment?
Hello, it's Elizabeth. What are the techniques that you use to not judge others? I find that one of the hardest elements. It's almost an involuntary reaction within the first 30 seconds of meeting somebody to form a judgment, given our cognitive biases. What tactics work for you?
Elizabeth, thank you for asking that. What I have to do, because I have to say, I am a judgmental person. I am, and I fight against this every day. I have to constantly stop myself and think, what might be their perspective? And maybe that's not what you're looking for. However, that's what I do. What is their perspective? Why might they be saying that or thinking that? And then I assume positive intent. Now, that's not easy. And I have actually gotten criticized before for this. What do you mean? Somebody just said something that was racist or homophobic, or they didn't realize that it was anti-religious. How dare they? Aren't you going to be angry about that? Just to assume positive intent, you're minimizing the situation. Especially if you're a person in a non-dominant position. But I think if I am going to practice good EQ, Elizabeth, I need to stop myself in my tracks and think about, what did you just think? Did you have a positive reaction or a negative reaction? And I have to tell you, I am judgmental, but this is something that I have been working on for years and years. You know why? Because when I returned from China, I had so many blind spots, or when I returned from Hong Kong before I went back to mainland China, and I had to start doing this self-inquiry. I did that through a number of assessment tools that I use and that I'm happy to share with anyone later. And that, being able to get this objective assessment, showed me where my blind spots are. So now when someone says something annoying, for example, eggs, and as I said, there were other things going on below the surface, but I knew it wasn't time to say something snarky or sarcastic back. Just assuming positive intent. Oh, really? What is the norm for your family to cook eggs. And then they talked about their family and their customs. I said, I will have to try that sometime. I don't like eggs like that, but maybe could I try one of yours? It may seem simplistic, but it's a lot harder to put into action. And the reason why I started my own coaching organization is because we all think we're better at things than we really are. And that goes back to research by Dunning and Kruger at Cornell in 1999. It's psychological. We all think that we are more skilled at certain things than others. And until we get that objective assessment, something where we step outside of ourselves, we really don't realize it. So I don't know, Elizabeth, did I answer your question?
Hey, 1 minute.
Sure.
Uh,
Farha, did you want to
have,
ask something? Denise, will Farha, are you on mic now? Then we'll go to Denise. Denise, what was your question? You had a really, really good question as well.
I'm going to go back and see what I actually asked. How can we best lead with EQ and have these conversations? At the time, you were talking about some of the challenging political conversations. So using that as an example, you have two sides that have two very different belief systems. So using that as an example, how can we move forward with having these difficult conversations where people have two completely belief systems, but you want to try to find some balance there?
Great question. Someone's waving. Hello. It's all about perspective shifting, Denise. We all have those strong beliefs, strong values. If we voted for Trump or we voted for Hillary or we voted for Biden or we're now going to vote for whoever is running. Samantha thank you. And does it really matter what we think in the scheme of things? What I try to do in situations like that, and I'm always in the classroom and in a webinar, I'm always apolitical. I'm always centrist. And it doesn't matter what my preferences are. But when I have conversations with my brother who has a different perspective than I do, what I have to do is stop and say, hey, Matthew, what do you think of, tell me more and listen. Well, what is it about that you prefer this candidate or this position over another or this policy? And then just keep asking him, tell me more, until you can understand somebody else. It's not possible to have a civil conversation. It's perspective shifting. And that's what I do in my inclusive leadership 8-week coaching course. We learn these steps of moving from denial to defensiveness to minimization and into how do we adapt and accept. And adapting means shifting a perspective to be able to say, I want to hear it. I want to try to see it from their perspective. And then the acceptance, it's really not accepting what they believe, but recognizing that they believe something different. Does that help?
It absolutely does. So I'm going to add on, if I may, another question, because as soon as I'm done with this webinar, I have a call where the person I'm on the call with, we have two different belief systems. And I've already gone through the discovery process with this individual, asking them, why do you think this? Tell me more. What is the value? And I'm still not at the place where I agree with them, and I have to make a decision today based on this conversation coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So based on facts, I'm trying to determine how to best say no to something, although there's a company need for it, but the need and the reality are two different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, that might sound a bit confusing. I'm trying to be vague and not necessarily give away what this internal
Right.
conversation is about, but how, when you determine, when you've gone through that phase.
Let's mute. Adiremi, please mute.
76 slides in the first chapter.
Let me see if I can, there we go.
Thank you. So when we're going through that phase where we're trying to better understand the other person's view, their perspective, how they came to that conclusion, and then make a decision or a determination based on that conversation, if I still I'm open to hearing I've been open to hearing what the individual has to say. I'm trying my best to understand their needs, which they're putting above company needs. How do I best then push back gently or say no?
Wow. That's a great question. And I think that would take a longer conversation than this. So maybe we'll have to have a chat offline.
Sure.
But when you think about decision making, so much of it is about the right fit. And I'm thinking right now back to when I was doing my coaching certification with the International Coach Federation, and we had a coach who would help us drill down through a situation without knowing the specifics. And that's the beauty of coaching. If you have listened well, if you have thought, if you seek to understand where they're coming from, and you keep asking those questions, tell me more. What is important to you? I would say it would be time to have a conversation to talk about fit. And you might have to be more direct and talk about what the vision, the mission of your organization is, and how it might not align entirely. A lot of it also, Denise, depends. Are you having a private conversation with them, or is this part of a meeting where other people are listening in, and that person who you're trying to figure out, what are they really all about? What is their motive? What's their incentive? You might need to have something offline with them individually.
Right.
Does that help?
It does. And it is a one-to-one conversation I will be having. So
Yeah.
thank you for that insight.
Keep drilling it down, assuming positive intent, being open with your questions, and you're also a coach, knowing not to keep saying why, because people can become defensive, but to continue asking questions and reframing. Am I hearing you correctly? And you could even ask them, here's what I think I hear. Can you confirm or disconfirm? Here's what I have to offer, or my organization has to offer, and ask them, where do you see alignment or potentially a disconnect? Allow them to come up with it. And you might enable them to come up with the decision themselves.
I appreciate, I'm going to go into this call assuming positive intent, which was not my position before I got on the call. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Denise. Well, we could go on and on and on. I would love to have more time, but I need to let Frank, sorry, I'm speaking with my South Jersey accent. We talk like this. Frank, I want to introduce my colleague, and he is going to talk about, for the last part of our conversation here, how he views emotional intelligence, and cultural intelligence. And this is kind of a preview for next month. Frank is supporting me in the practical part of intercultural communication and has some interesting stories to prove the concept of EQ and CQ. He was born and raised in Hamburg, Germany, and he is a leader and manager of international logistic companies, really high up there. He's also done high-level sales and operations and teams within organizations for more than 30 years. And his journeys have taken him from West Africa, where he lived with his family for 10 years, and later into Switzerland and Cyprus and Germany. And he has developed and mentored people across cultures. So Frank, please, I would love you to talk in the next few minutes about what you wanted to say. If people want to stay on and we can talk a little bit more, that's great. But Frank will also come back and continue this conversation for our next webinar. Go ahead, Frank. I'm going to be quiet, mute myself.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Elizabeth. Hello all. I want actually to share a story, practical story, personal experience with you. And this is about not such a common issue today. It's about Russia. After having worked in several countries and globally around the world, I was changing jobs, and then I came across a family and somebody asked me, come work for the Russians. And so we agreed. First, I thought it's a crazy thought, total different direction I've taken before, Africa, Europe, and so on. But then, so I was mandated to take over a Russian family organization with 1,200 people, 20 countries, directly managed by the owners. Me, coming from a corporate Swiss organization with global experience in my pocket, I thought, piece of cake. It was not as easy as I thought. What I found when coming to Moscow was pretty rough tone and command, and really a lot I had to learn. Having worked in a Swiss corporate was precision, punctuality, clear rules in meetings, diplomatic communication. That was my package. So I was used to common goals, consensus, all following a vision, mission, strategy. And me always enthusiastic, positive, cheering, now looking into poker faces. The first thing, when I met the first people, I was told, you have to earn the smile and respect of a Russian. I said, wow. So I then was asking for my first management workshop at fixed time, fixed agenda. I distributed prior as I used to. My plan was to onboard the team enthusiastically. Goal was to work one goal, one team. What happened? Out of 10 persons, one was punctual. German was on time. The Russian colleagues came in, one after another, and after 30 minutes, we were slowly starting. The team was complete only after almost 1 hour. So I was like, wow. In addition, they opened their laptops, worked on emails, on the mobile phone. Even the owners of the company were 1 hour late. So what happened to me? I was feeling disrespected, hurt in my ego. I was really annoyed. I was really ready to shout out my frustration to the team. I was, however, somehow able to control myself, but it was quite hard for me, I tell you. So after the meeting, I was then sitting with the owners and some team members trying to understand the meeting culture. I was sharing where I come from. Meetings are held differently. You want to become an international organizations. And I had the belief that my view was the right one, having worked and managed global teams all over. So what did I have, or what did I learn? What did I had to learn? Russia and Moscow is geographically enormous. Anything can happen on the road, so people are happy to make it, but not always on time. Power is always top down. The people are not used to a weak Westerner leadership style, what they considered weak. You have to understand that responsibles, for example, for finance, being in touch with money, they were undergoing really psychological and for a European not acceptable tests like lie detectors and so on before they can be in touch with money. Rooms and phones were wired. You have to be assertive, but at the same time accommodating for family issues, illness, delays. The teams, they were used to operational meetings, but not workshops. It's very common to hold their mobile phones to stay in touch with their families and clients, as this is a high priority for them, even in the workplace with a family. So if the wife or the husband calls, they pick up the phone. Yeah. Because anything can happen at home. Information is power and money. So people do not really like to share information. They don't have the sharing culture because they may have to share revenue, bonuses, and losing power. However, once you gain that trust, you have it forever. At the core, I found also that they grew up and were educated to always be better than the plan and to work extremely hard. It was not uncommon that people were spending the night in the office to finish a job. I once in the morning met my CFO and asked him, "What are you doing here so early?" "Oh, I was working until 4 o'clock and then I fell asleep at the desk." What a learning. So in essence, to manage my anger, I had to ask myself, where do I come from? And how can I get across to the people? That was really, so what are my beliefs? What am I doing? How can I come across? First, I had to control my emotions, accept the differences, and then to adapt to find a workable solution. How could I influence and change their beliefs to be able to convince them that we would be even more successful as one team? I adapted the next workshop, allowing for more breaks, more flexible timing, and more repetition during the meeting. I engaged with the people individually and tried to understand them. I then adapted also my style to be more factual, plan-oriented, and to their competing styles, while still remaining receptive for their personal issues. So a huge learning, and I've come across the same in Africa, in various countries. I've come across the same when working with and in the US, in UK, in Latin America, in Asia, in India, so Japan, all over. And it's really what Elizabeth is teaching here, and consulting and coaching is really, really very, very important, because in today's world, the world is becoming smaller. And I notice, just be it politicians, be it the business, people are unable to connect to other cultures. And if they want to be successful internationally and also in their own workplace, because we have more and more different cultures in the same workplace, we must adapt. Thank you. If you have any questions, Elizabeth.
Thank you
please.
so much. Yeah, Frank, thank you so much. I will continue. I went over more of what I was talking about. I'm sorry I didn't leave you enough time. Your story is amazing. thank you, everyone, for staying on. We will continue this. Next month, March 27th, there will be more announcements about this. Please join me, connect with me on LinkedIn, tell your colleagues. There are so many things that we can do all around the world to collaborate together to ensure that we have that emotional and that cultural intelligence. Anybody who would like to stay here and ask me and Frank more questions, you're welcome to stay on. And what I can do is turn off the recording now and bid you all farewell. Be safe, be well, and may this be a joyful year for each of you, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.